What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe show. As always, I like to say you're blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles and a solution for someone's problem. This is the home of Epic Conversations. I'm the host of Epic Conversations, 2018 Innovation Award winner given out by the Canadian Ethic Media Association, and hosting monthly online live stream broadcasts for fathers that are sponsored by Dad Central, Canada's national fatherhood organization, and Dove Men Care. You know, if you're a fan of the Dr. Vibe show, or if you're just joining the Dr. Vibe show, I love having new friends. And we have another new friend who was introduced to me by another friend. So first and foremost, I want to thank everyone who's watching live or on the replay. I want to shout out Mr. Luke, my brother from Windsor, Ontario. He is a solid Canuck, as we say, Canadian supporter. Thank you, as always, Luke, for taking the time to share. And I'd like to thank Doug Minter. Why am I forgetting that name? Doug Minter, who was from Knoxville, where our new friend is living, and is now in Toronto making positive difference in the Black community as a member of the Canadian Black Chamber of Commerce, or I think it's the Canadian Black Chamber of Commerce. But if I get it wrong, it's my head, not my heart. Let me get to the main line today, because I'm going to say, hey, actually, there's sunshine out in Toronto. Beautiful day. Hope it's sunny wherever you're watching this, or if it's nighttime, it's a clear night. Mike, he is affectionately known as a proud husband and father. He's a personal development coach and communications consultant, sought after speaker, author, and content creator, and workshop facilitator to those looking to uncover their unique greatness and embrace the fullness of who they authentically are. Mike's unique life experiences and gift of communication helps him bring thought-provoking insight and life-changing perspectives to diverse and eclectic groups from various walks of life. He's blessed with a number of callings, such as effectively changing the mindset of teens and young adults, helping professionals unlock their unique potential, equipping individuals with courage and confidence in the midst of transition. I'm going to cut it short because there's a lot of things here, but you know what? I think I'm going to get through this. Let me go through it. Mike's collective experiences, education, and personal development led to the creation of the Double Down on You leadership and personal development process. From the stage and in workshop settings, he challenges individuals to embrace their greatness while pursuing their interests, recognizing their faults and failures, and guarding themselves against their personal triggers. He effectively encourages individuals to unwrap their unique gift, G.I.F.T acronym for greatness, interest, failures, faults, and triggers. Additionally, he's super engaged. You'll be able to pick that up in about 30 seconds. In everything associated with Black male excellence from birth to legacy, he's committed to doing his part to help reshape the narrative that's so often presented regarding Black men. Some of the resources he's already created is the Black Fathers Now podcast and the book Dynamic Black Fatherhood Manifesto. These resources serve as a framework to inspire excellence to Black fatherhood. They also serve as a platform and structure for workshops and speaking engagements, specifically targeting Black fathers. Now, after all of that, you know the only reason I'm having on? Because he put me on his show. No, just...
One hand washes the other, my brother.
Carnivorous. Let's wash. There was an old song called "Wash Your Face in Your Sink." Something like that. Yeah, it was I can't remember. There was, but you know what? We're having fun. Michael, what is up? Welcome to the Dr. Vibe show, home of Epic Conversations. How you do?
Man, I do wonderfully well, and I appreciate you for taking time, man, to allow me to come and impact the world, through the lens of Dr. Vibe.
Lens?
Man, I have to call you a lens because, you impact the world, all these different continents, all these folks are coming together, and a lens is something that you see through. Right. So you are that lens that we're going through, that we're connecting with, and we're, actually, engaging with the world through. So that's why I said I'm going through the lens of Dr. Vibe, my brother.
Well, we're going through it together because I'm a firm person that if you work together, you win together.
Dig that. 100%.
So I am actually blessed and highly favored to have you on. I'd like to say welcome to people on different platforms. And I just noticed something really interesting. So people who are watching this live, I'll say it. Facebook Live is actually transcribing in real time our conversation.
Really?
So something new. Hey, I should go on more on the afternoons. I never saw it at nighttime, but this is an afternoon jam. But you know what? I like to say thanks to everyone who taking time to watch this live or or on the replay. Also, listen to this live or on the replay. Now, we've had some fun. Let's get down to some serious thoughts. Michael
What's up?
D, tell us a little bit about the young Michael D. Where you grew up, you
Mm-hmm.
all those spectacular things.
Gotcha, man. I appreciate the question, my brother. Well, originally, I'm from Augusta, Georgia. So, for those that are not familiar with Augusta, Georgia, there are typically two things that stand out. One, James Brown.
Okay.
That's our claim to fame, and the Masters Golf Tournament. And usually,
Yeah.
yeah. So, if you've heard of the Masters Golf Tournament and you've heard of James Brown, you've at some point in the conversation heard of Augusta, Georgia. And that's where I'm originally from, born and raised. You know, raised in a family with my mom and my dad, and I have two younger brothers, Daniel and David. And, you know, it's one of those scenarios in which I was raised with a village. You know what I'm saying? Like, it really was that whole concept of it takes a village to raise a child. You know, we really had that village embodied in Augusta, Georgia, where we could trace back 4 to 5 generations in the metropolitan area. You know what I'm saying? And so, yeah, so I grew up, you know, knowing a lot of my great grandparents and hearing stories about great great grandparents and things of that scenario, all kind of in the Augusta area. So when you think about extended family and cousins and uncles and aunts and, you know, close family friends, like, it was one of those things where it's hard sometimes to try to, you know, if you were a kid and you wanted to be mischievous and get in trouble, it was at times hard to get in trouble because every corner you turned around, somebody might know you and you might not necessarily know them. They knew that, hey, that's Maxine and Earl's grandson, or, oh, that's, you know, Maddie Leona and Olin's grandson, or that's DeAndre's nephew, or there's something, right? Like somebody that I might not know, but they're watching me. But that's the concept of the village. And so, yes, it might have kept me from getting in some of the trouble that I wanted to get into. But on the flip side, there was this hedge of protection around me that was kind of unbeknownst to me at times as well. So that was kind of the blessing of having this collective village growing up.
Nice.
And so,
I just want to interrupt. Luke is saying I choose James Brown over golf every day of the week.
man, you are my man, Luke. You and look, sidebar to that, it's funny. So growing up in Augusta, you know, Augusta's a pretty small town, and it's funny when you're from a particular place, you take things at home for granted, right? So to that point, Luke, you know, speaking directly to you, James Brown used to come to my church sometimes growing up.
What?
Yeah, literally. It was the funniest thing. And in Augusta, people in Augusta would take it for granted. We would go to Applebee's or some random restaurant or be walking through the mall and James Brown standing there. And it's not a big deal. Like, we see him everywhere. Yeah. And it was funny. It wasn't until you leave Augusta and you go to other places in which James Brown's all over the place and you see people referencing him or realizing that he's the most sampled artist in like music history, that this guy that you see standing outside of a regular restaurant or walking through the mall or coming to your church and, you know, just talking to everybody like it's like he's just a regular patron, you know, that's something we took for granted. And we didn't really understand the magnitude of that until later. And so yeah, so to your point, I choose James Brown over golf any day. But then also thinking about that, the Masters Golf Tournament, it was funny growing up in Augusta, one of those scenarios that a lot of the kids who go to high school there, spring break coincides with the Masters Golf Tournament. So a lot of the kids during high school work at the Masters Golf Tournament. And so I was one of those kids. I was able to work there and all. And you take that for granted until you grow up and you move somewhere else and you tell someone, you know, I used to go to the Masters working, or I would go to the Masters. You know, my grandparents used to get tickets as well way back in the day. That until you leave. And that was again something we took for granted because it was like, hey, that's just part of Augusta, you know? And so yeah, so Luke, I choose James Brown as well.
Luke also says you're never famous at home.
Man, look at here. Man, you and I actually spoke about that recently when we had a previous conversation, and that's so true. You're never famous at home. At home, you're just so, you know, I think Jennifer Lopez said she was Jenny from the block. So back home, she was Jenny from the block. Everywhere else, she was the superstar. Absolutely. And so,
absolutely. Well, I just want to say thank you to, we got people watching on Facebook, and if you have any comments or questions, please check them, put them in. We'll do the best to get Mike D to answer them in real time, or if you're on YouTube or on Get Vocal, please give us your questions or comments. We will get them going to Mike in real time. Growing up in the Deep South,
Mm-hmm.
did you experience racism of any sort growing up?
Man, it's interesting. I was born in 1979. Okay, so if you think about the time frame in which I was born in essence after the civil rights movement. I was born, after a lot of the monumental events happened, in regards to like civil rights, but I was still located in the Deep South, right? I was still in a state. I was born in Georgia, right? So there was a state that still had the Confederate battle flag on our state flag up until I believe the mid 1990s, right? But it was one of those scenarios that you just knew that was a part of life. Like it was nothing to drive down the street and, every third or fourth car might have a Confederate battle flag, car tag on the front of it. Or at times you might see one waving off the back of a truck. But being from the South, being from Georgia, that was just something you came to expect. You know what I'm saying? And so from the standpoint of racism, you knew that there were some lines in the sand. And you would hear that in conversation. Like, you would hear being referred to in certain ways at times, but then on the flip side, it was just like anywhere else. So I believe you have hate any and everywhere, right? Sometimes hate, lives under the cloak of darkness, and it's is put out there in a basically in a covert way. But then you have it in some scenarios in which is very much in your face. And so I had both instances of that kind of growing up, but the reality is it didn't deter from my growing up experience, right? And so to that point, one of the things I do like to mention is having history and having family, right? And so my parents obviously were from the generation before me. My parents were born in the 50s, so they came of age during the civil rights time. And so they had different experiences in the same area I'm from. Take it back a step further, my grandparents. So 3 out of 4 of my grandparents ended up going to college. 2 out of 4 ended up getting master's degrees. And the 2 that got master's degrees got their master's degrees in the 1950s. And what was interesting about that, they had to travel north to New York University to get their master's degrees during the 1950s. And so that was because of segregation, because of Jim Crow and a lot of the issues that were going on. They had to go north for their education, but then they obviously came back down south and settled there. And so again, you had it, you knew it was a part of life, but it was kind of one of those scenarios where, you just knew there were certain places you didn't go or certain things you didn't do. And I just think that stuff gets embedded into who you are, and you have situational awareness in regards to, issues of that sort.
Did your parents go through any racism during their time, because leaving to go to different schools? And if they did experience any of that, did they ever share that, or have they ever shared that with you?
It's interesting. Like both of my parents were of the generation in which they were in the midst of integration, right? So like the school, they were pretty much that generation that integrated various schools. So if you're talking about being in high school in middle and high school in the 60s and early 70s, that was that time frame. That was when you went from the all black school to, okay, you're getting bused over here to the school that's now being integrated. And so they mentioned, different examples of, seeing things or hearing things. But then on the flip side, that was the middle of the 60s. So, it was all in your face 24/7 throughout the media outlets and through protests and through monuments and all of that. So from the standpoint of them living through it, they saw it, they experienced it, they lived through it. And I think some of it also leads to some slight mistrust of other races. You know what I'm saying? And so to that point, I think that was something that they had to overcome as they grew up and started to expand their horizons and get into working and building relationships with people outside of just the black community. You started to see that everyone did not have that level of hate. And I don't want to paint the picture that everybody was like that. You know what I'm saying? You have, it's kind of like the concept, you have a couple of bad apples in every bunch. But there are some, and usually the bad apples are the ones that tend to, get the most notoriety, or that tend to paint the picture for everybody else. And that's not necessarily an accurate depiction of everyone. You know what I'm saying? So even though you might see a little bit of this and a little bit of that here or there, that doesn't mean that everyone is like that.
Excellent. Excellent. What, and I ask this conversation piece with almost everyone, so it's not something I just thought of. What qualities have your parents instilled in you that you still carry with you today?
Qualities that were instilled from my parents. You know, it's interesting, man. Like from my mother, I 100% say sacrifice. All right. Sacrifice. When I think of my mother, that's exactly what I think of. I think of sacrifice. You know, my mom was one that always put her family first in regards to everything that she did. I mean, personal accolades, her going back to school, like she finished college and got her master's degree. But as far as like finishing and getting her doctorate as she wanted to pursue it, she put all that on the back burner because she was thinking about us first. Right. I'll even give an example. It was interesting. You know, there was a story back in the middle. I think this was in '92 around Desert Storm. Right. So that was the Desert Storm that was happening in the Middle East. And they were recruiting nurses, and my mom was a trained nurse and a nursing professor. And so they were going around recruiting nurses to come into to enlist into the army and, you know, get bonuses and all of that stuff. And so she was thinking about it like, yo, this is an opportunity that, you know, financially would be cool. I think this would be a really good thing for our family. And so she initially thought about doing it. And that was from the standpoint of her interest at that particular moment. But then she thought about us. And she literally backed out of making that decision based off of the thought of what if she did get sent to the Middle East, or what if she did have to go here or go there. And she thought about us first. And so, and then it's just like case after case, she always put us first. And for me, that's something that I will always carry with me in regards to how I operate as a father, how I operate as a husband, how I operate as a parent, how I operate as a man, you know, being selfless. Because if you are selfless, eventually you will get yours, but you're also showing the concept of being a servant leader. And so for me, that's what my mom, you know, really brings to the table. As far as my dad, you know, my dad is resourceful. Like, and it's funny, even when I'm in here cooking, you know, I like to cook in the kitchen, right? That's my thing. I like to cook. I like to do a little something, but I do not like to follow recipes. You know, my wife's a better baker than I am. I'm a better cook because I like to tinker with stuff. Now, usually tinkering means I'm gonna mess something up initially, right? I'm gonna mess it up the first time, but the second time I make it, oh, it's restaurant worthy. You know, like that's my thing. And but I'm also resourceful. I'm the guy that can go to the kitchen or go to the refrigerator and leftovers of this and that. I'm the one that could probably go on the show Chopped and throw something together.
You know my mind was thinking the same thing because I'm a big time Food Network watcher and the Chop, and I think chefs are some of the most incredible thought people in the world. On a show like that, they're just given ingredients and they create something magical. So I can so much relate.
And that's me. And so I'm going back to like my father. My father is resourceful. And that's one of the things that I noticed from him. And like when I'm cooking or when I'm doing something, I'm not one that has to have everything all together, but I can figure out a way sometimes to make it work. And that's my dad. My dad might not have all the pieces to something, but if you give him enough time, he'll tinker with it. He'll figure it out. He'll make something work out for this half of this and piece of that. And next thing you know, you're like, how did you fix that? That's crazy. But I noticed that about myself. And so from a good quality perspective, I see my mother's the notion of sacrifice, being a servant leader. From my dad is the concept of being resourceful and being that resourceful leader, that resourceful guy, that person who can pull things together and make something, you know, out of nothing at times.
Nice. So when did you leave the home of the masters, and where did you go from the home of the masters?
So literally, man, I grew up in Augusta, Georgia, high school and everything. Shout out to Westside Comprehensive High School. And so after I finished high school, I went to Georgia Tech, or Georgia Institute of Technology. For those that don't know, you know, like some people will say, but some people will say like, oh, is that Georgia Tech University? No, fam, it's Georgia Institute of Technology. But I went to Georgia Tech from Augusta, and, you know, went there and got my degree in economics. Didn't start off that way. I thought I was going to, major in mechanical engineering and get my pre-med prerequisites. And then, I take calculus 1 3 times and calculus 2 twice, and inorganic chemistry got that big F. And I was like, I gotta find another way. And so I ended up, switching my major to economics, and I ended up getting a degree in economics at Georgia Tech.
Congratulations. And after school, what was your next step?
Yeah. So after school, man, it's interesting. This kind of is part of the impetus behind the concept of double down on you. But after school, literally, I was just trying to find a job. I'm a person who likes to communicate. I make good relationships and all of that. So I was just trying to find a job, and naturally I gravitated to sales. And so from there, I got my first job out of college. It was an IT sales company right outside of Atlanta. Did that for a little bit. Then I got into consumer goods sales. And then from there, I matriculated into healthcare sales, primarily pharmaceutical sales for the majority of my career. But pharmaceutical sales and home healthcare sales and physician recruiting, that's pretty much where my career trajectory took me after college. But the thing is, like I mentioned before, the impetus or the inspiration behind Double Down on You is the concept of really knowing who you are, right? So going into college, my goal to go to college was I wanted to major in mechanical engineering and get my pre-med prerequisites and go to medical school. But then the question for real you need to ask is why, right? I wanted to go to medical school, not because I really wanted to be a doctor, but because the people that I saw around me that I deemed to be successful, that I deemed to, be financially doing well and all of that, they tended to be in the healthcare field. And so a lot, I have, an uncle and cousins and an aunt that are physicians. And at one time, an uncle that was in pharmaceutical sales. And so all of these things that I saw led me to think that I need to go into medicine. And I'll tell you another part to it. When I would sit around at Thanksgiving and the cousins and uncles and all that came to dinner that were, in the healthcare field, when they were talking, sometimes it sounded like an episode of ER, right? So-and-so CCs of this and something that, and using all the clinical terms. And I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. And so to me, it sounded good and I wanted to be like that. So I was like, maybe I'll be a doctor too. But I never really took time to do the deep dive into who I was and the gifts that I bring to the table and how I could potentially impact the world on a very deep level. So I pursued that. And as I mentioned before, as soon as I got to college, my academic record just kind of hit the fan because I, in essence, was pursuing something I didn't need to pursue, but I was really just seeking something that I thought was an opportunity, but it really was not aligned with who I was. And that also led to after college, pursuing jobs. I just wanted a job like a lot of kids, like a lot of folks finishing university or finishing college or finishing a degree program. You just want to get a job. Right. And so for me, I literally just matriculated into sales and landed in a few jobs. And I learned a lot along the way. But the thing is, it was this constant challenge or this constant void. And that void was fulfillment. Right. And so to that point, that's daily one of the struggles that I had. I mean, I would do well and made good money and did this and did that, but the notion of fulfillment wasn't there. And so again, that literally led to, years later, the creation of Double Down on You and this thought process of how can we help individuals, develop the courage and the confidence to double down on who they authentically are. And the ultimate goal is for you to become capable, yet under control. So yeah, so that's a little snippet as far as, what happened directly after college.
Okay. Now, I just want some clarification.
Okay.
Black fathers now and what you're doing with all this is that full time now? You're not part of the corporate world. So when did you make the decision to leave the corporate world and say, this is my passion?
Well, I was actually fortunate to not have to make that decision. The decision was made for me.
Okay.
So what ends up happening? So I was in the pharmaceutical industry, and for a lot of people who are not aware of the inner workings of pharmaceutical sales, when things are good, things are awesome. But then when they hit the fan, and typically quickly. And usually if you talk to someone that's in the pharmaceutical industry and they've been in the industry for any length of time, more than 3 to 5 years, typically they've either survived a layoff or they've been laid off at some point, because, you deal with patents expiring, various market numbers hitting. So they have to cut the workforce or cut the sales force and bring them back on at some other point. I mean, it's a lot of little dynamics that come into play, but that's something that definitely does happen within the pharmaceutical industry. So what ended up ushering me into this concept of how do I monetize? How do I create? How do I build something utilizing the gifts and talents that I've been blessed with? That came, after the last layoff that happened with my latest, or the most recent pharmaceutical company that I worked for. And that happened the beginning of 2017.
Okay. Why did you choose to go on your own and not to try to go back into the corporate world?
Man, I'll tell you, I teased it a little bit when I mentioned the story a second ago, but the whole concept of fulfillment. And I'll tell you, it was interesting. The layoff officially it was announced the end of 2016, but it officially came into play, the beginning of 2017. And, towards the end of 2016, I started feeling funny. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was this thing where something's not right. I mean, there was a lot of life changes happening as well. Like, I lost a grandmother, like a month or so before that. And, I was just struggling with fulfillment. I was doing well, financially we're doing very well, and, ranked pretty well and all of that. But I was just fulfillment. It was bothering me internally because I knew I was not doing what I was supposed to do. And honestly, what ended up happening, I had anxiety attacks. And so literally I had one night that I woke up, it was like a cold sweat. Like, I don't know what was going on. And I felt like my heart was jumping out of my chest. Honestly, I felt like I was having a heart attack. It bothered me. So I drank cold water and all of that and just relaxed, and things calmed down, and it was cool, but it scared me. And I'll tell you, that happened again, probably about a month later. And this was right around the time and not long after my grandmother had passed, and literally right before the layoff was announced, and just all of this, it was just bothering me. I woke up again, same scenario, and literally the middle of the night, I went to the ER because I thought I was having a heart attack.
Wow.
Like, I was like, literally, I was like, babe, I got to go to the heart. I got to go. I don't know what's going on. So I literally went to the ER, and they hooked me up to all the stuff. And long story short, it was not a heart attack. It was an anxiety attack. And so again, to me, that was one of those aha moments of something pricking my spirit saying, Mike, you need to move. You need to go. You need to walk in what it is you're looking to do, because even though the job is good, the people you were working with were good, you had great leadership and all of that, that's still not your purpose at this particular moment. And so for me, the layoff came, and it was like a sigh of relief, because I didn't have to make that choice. And that's a challenge for a lot of people in regards to career scenarios that they know they need to leave, but you have the golden handcuffs, right? And so it's easy when you get laid off or you get fired or they shut it down or something, because then you don't have to make that decision. What's hard is when someone has to consciously make that decision when the getting is good, when you got money coming in hand over fist, when you got the company car and the company credit cards and the this and the that, you got all these different things, and you make a decision to step away from that. That takes courage. And for me, in my case, I didn't have to make that decision. Now, I had to consciously make the decision to not jump back into it afterwards. But the reality was I did not have to consciously make the decision to step away and go and pursue what I need to do. And honestly, even at that moment, I didn't have clarity on the specific steps that I needed to take at that point either.
Wow. What was your wife's reaction? What was your family's reaction with that? Because that's a big decision.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Honestly, man, my wife is awesome, man. She was supportive. Like, she literally is the one that, hey, if that floats your boat, man, I'm cool with it. I'm in the boat. She's cool. Like, she is so, and that's one of the things that, it's a challenge at times in relationships or in marriages, because sometimes we want our spouse to be a certain way and do a certain thing. Right. Like, I want her to, be entrepreneurially focused and say, together, we're going to go and build this and do that. And that's how I want her to be. But the reality is, how she is how I need her to be. Right. And so it's so interesting because how I want is for, us to, burning the midnight oil, creating this, creating that. But the reality is that's not her thing. Right. But her thing is, I'm going to support you. And hey, if you want to push it, let's go. Let's ride. I'm here. I'm not going to get in the way, and I'll add value if you need me to, but I'm giving you the freedom and flexibility to walk in your purpose. And so for me, I'm forever grateful to Maisha Jones Dorsey for for that.
I'm going to hail her up and hold her on your queen on a pedestal right now.
There you go.
When did you know that she was the one?
Oh man, dude, I'm gonna tell you, it's a story. And I tell this at times, but it was interesting. I went to a wedding of a former coworker years ago, and this is before my wife and I were engaged. We were just dating, right. And at the reception, and my wife didn't go with me because we dated. Actually, we were living long distance. I was living in Tennessee, she was in Texas, and traveling and stuff. And so I actually went to one of my former coworkers' wedding, and at the wedding reception, I heard the guy who was getting married, address the crowd, and he was just, giving pleasantries and all. But then he said something. He talked about his life and growing up, and he was one of 3 boys like myself. He was, in essence, a mama's boy like myself. And I think he was the oldest like myself. So there was a lot of alignment with this guy, and this was the husband of my former coworker. And so he was talking, and, he said in his little speech, he said, a lot of people ask me when I knew she was the one. And he said, the moment that I didn't mind her replacing my mother as the most important lady in my life, I knew she was the one. And I was like, and I'm not one that gets to crying and stuff. Well, at that moment, I mean, I got kids and I got a wife now, so I'll cry at the drop of a dime now. But at that moment, I was not a crier. Right. And so it was like, it had me teared up because I thought about it. And then I thought about, at the time, my girlfriend, and I was like, wow, how do I think and how do I feel about that? And so literally the moment that I was okay with Maisha replacing my mother as the most important lady in my life was the moment that I bought the ring. And it's interesting. My mother also has done a good job of making that easy for my brothers and I. So growing up, my mom always understands. She said, when you find a wife, you find a good thing. And the moment that you take a wife, she is your priority. Now, love your mama, come and visit me, send me cards and bring the grandkids and all of that. But your wife is your priority. And so my mother has done a great job. And we're so fortunate to have it that way because not all guys and even girls have relationships like that. Mama still wants to be the number one. Yep. I want to be your this and I want to be your that. And so, again, kudos to my mom for making that easy because I can only imagine how challenging it is loving your mother, but then also having a mother who maybe, kind of gets in the way and still wants to be on the pedestal of being, the light of your life, so to speak, and not allowing your wife to be that as she should, due to the divine order.
Nice. Well, on the Facebook platform, Olivia Dorsey Tate says, go Maisha Dorsey. So Olivia is a full supporter.
Olivia's my cousin, man. Yep.
Full support. This is good.
That's stuff. It.
Thank you so much for sharing the takes. Keep them coming. A few questions. We're going to go into the area of hood now. Mm-hmm. When you grew up, family seems to be very, very important. Mm-hmm. Was the vision to have a family foundation laid from your younger days?
Man, honestly, yes. I've always wanted to be a dad. I've always wanted to have my family. And what's interesting, when I looked at success, family was always at the core of success, right? And I'll tell you, I have to kind of deviate a little bit. So growing up, it was not just like this perfect Huxtable scenario where everybody is perfect and whatever. It was a challenging scenario. And, one of the things that I share a lot in some of the writings and actually on some of the interviews is that, I also grew up in a scenario in which, my father struggled with the disease of addiction. And so because of that literally, that caused some drama in regards to the scenario growing up. And so one of the things that I came to learn was that first, addiction is a disease, and it's not a scenario that makes that person any less. Like I mentioned before, I've learned so much from my dad. We have a great relationship, and it's a blessing. My parents are still married to this day, and I'll even say something about that, which ends up really leading to a deeper lesson of modeling. My parents are still married to this day. My brothers and I are all three married, and all three of us are married to girls whose parents are still married to this day as well.
Rare.
And so it's very rare. And, but I do
rare there, man.
That is. And I'll tell you, man, to that point, even though it was an imperfect process and there was challenges and circumstances and this or that, I believe the modeling of, consistency, the modeling of showing, what love is, but then also the follow through literally has led to, what I just mentioned, in which both of my brothers, all three of us married ladies whose parents are still married to this day as well. And it's not like we set out for that to happen. It happened. And so there's something to how you model things. And so to that point, when I thought about success and I thought about family, family was at the core of it. Family's always been at the core of success, in my opinion.
Share with us the moment you became a father, and also share the moment if there was anything different when you became a father the second time.
Well, man, it's interesting. So when I became a father the first time, it was interesting. My first child, Morgan, is a girl, right? Little girl, and she's the apple of my eye, right? My little girl, born in 2011. And I'll tell you, I grew up in a situation where it's all boys in my household, and the majority of my cousins were boys. Like, it was just, I grew up in an all boy, rough housing, putting holes in the wall, breaking windows. That's how we wrestling, fighting, that was us, right? I grew up in that. So I'm comfortable in the boy environment growing up. Like, that was my thing. Like that, I could do that in my sleep. But then when we did the ultrasound and they were like, okay, you're having a little girl, I was like, whoa, what's about to happen here? Like, the only girl in my household was mama, and then mama's different. So, it's a different scenario.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I met some random guy. I don't even know. I wish I knew this guy and I had his information, because he set my mind at ease. I was at a store and I was mentioning, hey, I'm having a little girl. And this random dude that I never knew just poured into me. And he said, I'm going to tell you something, and it's going to make you rethink having a little girl. He said, your son is your son until he takes a wife. Your daughter is your daughter for the rest of your life. And I was like, wow. That is like, this guy poured. I guess he saw that I was a little nervous about it. He poured into me, man. Literally, your son is your son until he takes a wife. Your daughter is your daughter for the rest of her life. And what was interesting after that, I started paying attention to all the ladies that I know that had good relationships with their father. And I was like, wow, you know what? That's the truth. The little girls take care of dad. The little boys are like, all right, dude, I'll see you when I see you. The little girls are making sure daddy's taken care of. And I was like, wow, that was interesting. And so that moment, it literally kind of eased my spirit and allowed me to, step into being a father of a little girl, or, the popular hashtag now, being a girl dad. It allowed me to step into that with confidence, because I was like, wow. And it's so amazing how, the concept of seeking, you shall find, right? Like, when you need answers, if you open yourself up to it, you'll get them. And so for me, I was nervous and all of that about having a little girl. And then lo and behold, some random dude, I might've been getting an oil change or something, sitting there, gave me this word of advice. Never seen the guy before. Don't know who he is from Adam, but yet he dropped this to me because I needed it. And that gave me the peace and the comfort to walk into fatherhood, specifically fatherhood of a little girl, with confidence. And so that was it. And I'll tell you, then having my little boy, he's Maxwell, he'll be 7 in June. And so Maxwell he's a trip. But having a little boy, I was like, yo, I'm ready for this. Like, because I grew up around all boys and all of that. So I was ready for the whole having a little boy thing. But being a father of two, it became challenging because you had a 2.5-year-old and a newborn, and, trying to navigate the fact that, okay, we've gotten the first one to sleep well. Now we got this whole staying up and waking up every hour or every 2 hours. That whole thing starts again. And, it was a challenge, but it's a blessing, man. I will say there's not one thing I would change about the whole process, but it's some lessons being learned completely.
Nice. Very nice. Very nice. How do you see, here we go. Do you compare your growing up with your children's growing up? Do you ever take a look and say, wow, same, different compared to when I was growing up in their age group that they're in right now?
It's interesting, like, because they're 9 and almost 7. And so I guess I probably I'm 40. So I have some recollection of specific experience being 9 and being 7, but a majority of those experiences will be kind of narrated by somebody else. So it'll be an uncle or an aunt or a parent or somebody basically saying, oh, I remember when you used to do this or you used to do that. And so I don't have any direct correlation between them and myself at that same age from my own experience. A lot of it stems from, when my mom will post a picture or a cousin will send a picture or something when I was about that age, and they will talk about something that was happening then. And then I can kind of make the connection and see the resemblance or hear about, one of the antics that I pulled off and say like, wow, that's exactly what Maxwell, or that's exactly what Morgan would say, or that's how one of them would handle this as well. So I'm able to kind of piece it together, but it's hard for me to say this direct experience correlates with that direct experience for them.
Well, let's get to the Black Fathers Now. What's the story behind that? How did that start?
Man, so Black Fathers Now, the tagline is bringing the village to the brothers. And so, as I mentioned before, growing up, the way that I grew up in Augusta, where we had, a huge extended family and family friends and church family, neighbors and all of that, I was raised basically as a product of the village. The village helped to raise us. It was not just my parents or just my grandparents. It was everybody. And so the concept of it takes a village to raise a child, the age old African proverb, is so important. It was important for my life, but it's also integral in the success of all of us. We need community. We need that village to succeed because we can't do anything by ourselves. And so when I think about the concept of bringing the village to the brothers, Black Fathers Now is a podcast platform in which we take insight, inspiration, and wisdom from dynamic brothers who are key opinion leaders or who have some experience or have accomplished something or have gone through something in life that directly correlates with the Black male experience. And the whole goal is taking those stories, taking that information, that insight, that wisdom, and transcribing it or pushing it out to the brothers via technology, i.e. the podcast or YouTube video. So prior to Black Fathers Now, I had another podcast called the Fit Urban Life Show. So I did the Fit Urban Life Show from 2015 to the early 2017, which did 122 episodes of it. It literally was all about just living a holistic life, right? Like, everything, all the components to, being well and living well and doing your best. That's what it was all about. I interviewed people from all walks of life about that. And, but towards the end of it, I really started to lose interest because I knew that I was not, in essence, walking in purpose. This also coincided with, my anxiety attack and the layoff and everything. So I, in essence, shut the show down and took a break from it. That was also about the time that, there's a guy who has a podcast that I followed, a couple of years ago. And, he put out a flyer for, getting consulting sessions or, to kind of figure out your purpose or figure out who you are, all of that. And so I, in essence, paid for a consulting session with this individual. And we sat down and we talked about life. I talked about my journey. And then he said, brother, everything that you're doing, everything that you're working towards, everything that you're moving towards, revolves around fatherhood in some way, shape, or form. And I was like, you're really speaking the truth. And that's something that I kind of run from. Right. And so literally just uncovering that and talking about it really gave me the confidence to say, I do need to step into this realm of talking about fatherhood, because everything that I was doing literally revolved around me wanting to be a great husband, but then also me wanting to be a great father to leave a legacy going forward, for my kids. And so that in essence got the ball rolling on thinking about how do I push out the message of fatherhood, and then specifically Black fatherhood, because we need it. Right. I mean, if you look at, outside in pretty much every statistical category outside of athletics, Black men are kind of at the bottom of virtually every statistical category. And so one of the scenarios when I looked at that and I thought about fatherhood and I thought about myself, I was like, we need to have specific conversations that are targeting us, that are speaking to us, that allow us to go from good to great. And another nuance to that is the fact that a lot of the narrative that I'd seen prior to starting Black Fathers Now focused on bringing the bottom up. So it was about absentee fatherhood, or, Black dads aren't doing this or aren't doing that. And that wasn't the conversation that I wanted to have. Most of my contemporaries were, in essence, pretty good dads. They were doing their thing, but a lot of them also struggled with that whole concept of fulfillment. Like I mentioned before, they looked in the mirror daily and realized that, I'm good according to the world standards, but I could be better, right? I could go from good to great. And so that in essence was kind of the motivation behind creating Black Fathers Now, bringing the village to the brothers, this platform to help brothers go from good to great, to help the average in Black fatherhood become excellent, because we want excellence in Black fatherhood to become the new average.
Excellent. How long did it take from the idea to the first episode?
The idea to the first episode, recording about 2.5 months. The actual release was about 4 months. So I started Black Fathers Now in the summer of 2017. And so it's about I would say about a 4-month process to really just kind of hone in on, the topics, the thought process, the direction. But then once I got rolling, it was on.
And do you remember that first recording?
Well, the first recording was just my intro recording. It was, introducing myself to the audience, what is Black Fathers Now, what you can expect. And and just kind of going forward with that. So it's pretty much just an intro, a little into who I was, my mindset, my thought process, what the goals are for the show itself. And and that was pretty much episode number 1. So if you go back, you can still listen to it. Episode number 1, the intro episode, that's what you'll hear.
Is there anything along the journey of Black Fathers Now that has been new to you?
What do you mean by new to me?
The fact that, did you hear something that you had never heard of before? They said, wow, I didn't know that.
I think as it pertains to like nuances of people's individual story, right? Because the thing is, I'm speaking to Black fathers, but I am a Black father, right? So it's one of those scenarios in which, I am my audience as well. So I've experienced a lot of the same things. Now, I might not have experienced them the same way that someone else has, right? So their specific or unique experience might be, very much tailored to them. And that could be new to me. But the concepts, the principles, the overall themes, so to speak, I'm pretty aware of. So I don't think I've gotten any like kind of aha moments like, wow, this is something completely new, completely out of left field for me in regards to fatherhood. And it's not to say that I know everything, because I'm learning every doggone day. But from the standpoint of just the journey of Black fatherhood, has there been any surprises along the way in the interviews and, information being uncovered that has been somewhat of a surprise? Not to this point.
Olivia Dorsey Tate on the Facebook platform says, Black Fathers Now is an amazing platform for the brothers. I wonder why she's saying that.
I'll pay her later.
Who is the youngest father you've had on the show?
Ooh, let me see. Who is the youngest? I'm trying to think. The
And then
youngest
on the other end, who's the oldest father?
This is interesting. The youngest father was at the time. It's interesting. I think this is literally. I'm trying to rack my brain. I want to say at the time, was it Flip? I believe. Okay, I might be wrong, but this is just off the top of my head. I think the youngest father I had, and he was not like super young. He was in his like mid-20s at the time that we interviewed. But Flip Benjamin,
Okay.
I believe, was the youngest father, and he was like mid to late 20s, if I'm not mistaken. And then the elder of the group so far as fathers that I've interviewed, is actually my neighbor, Mac McSwine. And Mac, I believe, is late 70s.
Whoa.
Yeah, late 70s. And so, yeah, I interviewed him. And what's interesting about his story, Mac was talking about growing up in Mississippi during the
Oh,
civil rights
yeah.
movement. Yeah, so his story is, I mean, it's powerful. He literally walked through and talk, because he was from where the SNCC set up like the voter registration drives, and that was while he was in high school. And then it was interesting. He finished high school in '64, and then he came to college, and then he graduated in college in 1968, like the month after Martin Luther King was killed. And then after graduation, he went to the Poor People's Campaign in Washington D.C. that summer. And so it's just like his story was amazing. But yeah, I believe Mac McSwine, off the top of my head, is the most senior brother that I've had. And I think Flip Benjamin might be the youngest father. But when I say younger, he wasn't like a teenager. He was, mid to late 20s. So typically most of the guys that I've interviewed that are fathers are between, in their mid 20s, and I've had a brother that's in his late 70s.
I just found that interesting because I'm blessed to do a lot of mentorship with fathers, and the youngest father I've mentored was a 17-year-old who had twins.
Wow.
That was an
Wow.
experience.
I
That was
bet,
an
man.
experience, and still is an experience. In regard to that,
Mm.
misconceptions of Black fathers still exist
Mm.
today.
Mm.
In your conversations with Black fathers, do they ever address that or bring those up during your conversations with them?
Man, what's interesting about misconceptions, we all know the narrative that gets put out about us, right? We can watch TV, we can listen to music, we can, scan through the news, and we can see, and when I say the narrative that gets created, yes, there are some good images out there, but typically the not good stuff tends to outweigh the bad stuff. Right. And so that's why we have a negative perception across the board as it pertains to being a Black male, as it pertains to Black fatherhood. Typically the things that, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. So the squeaky wheel is typically the thing that might not be the most positive. And so that gets the most attention. When it comes to the conversations that we have on Black fathers now, again, my target audience is that brother who is in his kid's life, who's, to the world doing pretty all right, but he knows that he's probably searching for fulfillment, or he's not being all that he can be, and he wants to go from good to great. So a lot of the conversations, or pretty much almost all of the conversations that I have, are about bringing unique stories, unique situations, unique perspectives to the table that allow that brother to dive in and find something that they can apply to their life right now. So from the standpoint of negative stereotypes, or, situations that may be challenging, or misconceptions, each interview that I do is geared towards helping to reshape that stereotype or reshape those perceptions, because I'm bringing brothers on like yourself who, are impacting the world using their voice from Canada. I'm bringing on, international musicians. I'm bringing on, investors. I'm bringing on brothers who are entrepreneurs and, educators. And, I'm bringing on people from different perspectives who have a walk of life in which something in their story can connect with the brothers that are listening, and they can take something from that and apply it. I mean, the title of the show is Black Fathers Now. So I don't want it to just be about Black fathers. I want it to be Black fathers, and there's information that you can take and apply to your life right now.
Curious, how do you get fathers to appear on the show? What sort of process do you use?
Man, it's interesting, man. Honestly, well, some of it starts from personal relationships, right? So you connect the dots and you start, building relationships and building a community with, with individuals, and you start looking around and you're like, this person actually has an interesting story. And what's interesting about that, because I'm very intentional about telling stories, I'm very intentional about sharing stories, I can find a story anywhere. Right. And so what's interesting about that, I mentioned, you asked a question about like who was the elder of the those that I've interviewed so far. And that came about from standing at the mailbox at the same time with Mac. We were talking about life and he mentioned something about Mississippi and he talked about something about, voting. I think it was an election or something coming up at the time. And I was like, man, you know what? Would you like to come on Black Fathers Now and share your story and share your history? And he said, well, I guess I can come over there and do that. And so he came on across the street, but it started because I'm always intentional about seeing a story, seeing an opportunity, seeing something that would resonate with the Black male experience and bringing that on. And also scenarios that help to highlight, Black men in a positive light. So it's a dual purpose, right? I want to share stories, information, insight, and wisdom, but then I'm also highlighting brothers who are doing amazing things. Now, the brothers aren't perfect, right? But most of, and so before we get to the interview, I always let the brothers know that, hey, this is not a gotcha show. I'm not here trying to pull something out that's going to make you look bad and, all of that. This is literally about helping to help you to shine, because when you shine, when you put yourself out there in a very positive fashion, that does its part of helping to reshape the narrative that might get put out there negatively on other media outlets. And so I utilize this kind of in a twofold way: share the stories, insight, inspiration, and wisdom, but then also helping to reshape the narrative through positive imagery and positive messaging, with Black males. And that's why I've also, with Black Fathers Now, I get, inquiries about bringing, different folks on, but I've only interviewed Black males as well. And I'm going to stick to that because I think my purpose in this particular mission or in this particular platform is to help to highlight, the Black male experience.
Mm-hmm. Sweet. What have you learned about yourself on the journey?
What have I learned about myself? First off, it's bigger than me, right? When you realize that you're a part of something that's bigger than you, and you trust the process and you start working and you start pouring into it, utilizing your gifts, your talents, your skills, it's stated, your gifts will make room for you. And so for me, understanding that I'm a part of something bigger, but I've also been gifted that vision's been placed inside of me. So a lot of times when we think about being a part of something bigger, we think about, jumping into somebody else's pool, or being, in somebody else's organization or somebody else's company, or, being in somebody else's whatever. But being a part of something bigger than yourself, and that thing bigger than yourself is the vision that's been placed inside of you. That's like an amazing thing that you have to, that you wrestle with at times, right? Because sometimes you ask the why me, or am I prepared for this or whatnot. But if you start walking, you start to align yourself with scenarios that allow you to bring this thing to fruition. So for me, it's the notion of realizing that I've been gifted with what's necessary to carry the vision forward, and being confident in that. Because sometimes, your confidence does waver. Like if maybe the numbers aren't the way they want them to be, or you might not get the number of downloads on this episode or something on that episode, you start to question yourself at times. But the moment that I question, I always get a little nudge from somewhere. Sometimes it's a DM or an email or a call or a text, saying, hey, keep moving. And you get that little bit, and that's the nudge that you need to keep going. So for me, I've learned that, again, it's nothing is too big, right? If that's a vision that's been placed inside of your heart for you to carry forward, just walk in that and have confidence, have courage to do so, and it will work out. Now, you don't know when it's going to work out, but it will work out.
Yes. And I just want to shout out to someone U Foresight is on Periscope. Also, DH Sub 122. It's your first day on Periscope, and you're checking out this conversation. Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Awesome.
Is there anything you've learned about Black father or Black fatherhood that you did not know?
Black fatherhood. I mean, well, I'm be full transparency. I didn't know much about it until I became one, right? Yeah, I mean, and that's the funny thing. Like, yes, I grew up in a house and I saw Black men and I saw fathers. And I had grandfathers. I have a father, and you have all of that. But the reality is, you still don't know until you step into that role. And so that's literally a piece of advice I give to, new dads all the time. I'm like, you know what? You're going to be ready and not ready at the same doggone time. Like, that's it. And so to that point, I came into it completely naive. I don't care how many books you've written. I don't care how many are read. I don't care how much advice you've received. I don't care. You can have everything laid out for you, but until you step into that role of fatherhood, you don't know. And so for me, I literally started with a blank slate, and everything has been a learning experience. The concept of patience, commitment. I mean, it's all of these things, man. Like, these things, until you experience it, I don't care how many people tell you about it. I don't care how many books you read about it. I don't care how many advisors you have around you. You don't know until you get in it. Until you jump in the water, you don't know how cold it is. But when you jump in the water and it's cold, give it 3 or 4 seconds. What does your body do? It adjusts.
True. We are having this conversation at a critical time, not only in the history of the world. This is a generational moment. As I've told people, we're going through a time that it is affecting everybody directly or indirectly. From your conversations with Black fathers, what do you feel are some of their concerns, and what suggestions would you like to share with them in moving forward for those who are able to move forward? Those, and also to the messengers who aren't able to move forward right now.
Well, I'll say the biggest concern for everyone, for Black fathers, for fathers, for people in general, is the uncertainty. Uncertainty is like, that's on the forefront of everyone's mind. And what's interesting about the concept of uncertainty is that, to be completely honest, you can have everything planned out perfectly, and that does not mean that things are going to end up perfectly, right? When we do various things, when we take various actions, when we, live a particular life, all that does is help to increase the probability of a particular outcome. There's no guarantee on that outcome. And so to me, when you look at this pandemic that we're all dealing with, the world has in essence shut down, due to COVID-19, the corona crisis. I mean, the world has shut down all at once. I mean, it's hard to think about a time in which the world, not just a country, not just a part of the world, but the world in itself pushed pause. And that in itself is leading folks to think about this concept of new normal. What is that going to look like? They're trying to predict what it's going to look like. But the reality is, you can do all the forecasting in the world, and there's still no guarantee for that to end up being correct. And so I think a lot of the issues that we're facing going forward, that for those, again, that are blessed to live through this, that are blessed to get through this and to come out on the other side, a lot of the challenges are going to come in the form of trying to predict the future. And so taking it back to experience in corporate America, one of the challenges that you end up facing in corporate America is not whether or not, the company is doing well, is whether or not the company is tracking towards forecast. So I'll give you a prime example. When I was doing pharmaceutical sales, I was selling a product, and this product was ending, towards the end of its life cycle. So it was declining in market share. They actually had forecasted a decline in market share over the next so many quarters. And that was the prediction. It was going to decline like half a percentage per quarter over the next year until the patent expired. And you, as a representative, actually did well if you slowed the decline. So you didn't win by actually increasing market share. You won by slowing the decline based off of forecast. So I said that to say, or use that as a backdrop from this, for the standpoint of a lot of us are looking at life and we're trying to forecast. We're trying to predict what 2022 is going to look like, what the world's going to look like in 2025. And the thing is, we don't know. And if you're trying to forecast it, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. Now, you could get excited and, you could underdo something and things work out better than expected. But the reality is you're setting yourself up for the okie doke if you're trying to forecast the future. So for anybody out there, for the Black fathers that are challenged with the uncertainty, the biggest thing that I would leave you with is don't worry about the future because you can't predict the future. Learn how to live in the now. And being in this corona crisis, this thing that has shut down the world, has forced us to be in the moment. Now, a lot of us won't lean into that. A lot of us are, kind of itching to get back to what we used to do. But the reality is, if you lean into this notion of being in the moment and you start to realize that you really don't determine what the future holds, the only thing that you have is the present. The past is already gone. That's water under the bridge. That's a economic term. That's a sunk cost, right? All you have is the moment. And if you live in the moment, the probability of the future will be better, but there's still no guarantee there. And so to that point, I would encourage everybody to take a moment to be in the moment and to not get so focused on what the future is going to look like, because your forecasting is going to be the issue. It's going to cause the anxiety. It's going to cause the frustration because we're trying to map out a life that's already been mapped for us, one, but then two, that is going to be uncertain no matter what. So I hope that makes sense and hope that gives a sense of comfort, even though it's different, because again, we've spent our lives trying to predict everything. Think about this. You watch sports, right? I mean, we're all sports fans. Before a game comes on, what do they ask the analysts? So what is so-and-so going to do in this game? How do you expect him to handle this? How many points do you expect him to have? And I'm just like, it's cool to get people's analytical opinion about things, but it's an analytical opinion, right? They can't guarantee that this person is going to score this number of points, rush for this number of yards, have this number of hits, home runs. That's not, I don't know. I think we have to get out of that mindset of trying to predict the future and really double down on the moment.
Good words to close up the conversation with. And you were reading my mind a bit because I like sports, not as much as I used to, but I like the thought process behind sports. And I live in Toronto, and the last NBA champions were the Toronto Raptors. But the person that carried them to their championship, the lead was a gentleman named Kawhi Leonard. And I remember after they won the championship, I remember a reporter asking Kawhi, how do you just able to just pour it on? And he said, I just think the moment. I don't think the past. I don't think the future. I am just focused on what I'm doing right now. And for me,
that's real.
If I speak one day, I'll get to have conversations with these high-level performers. I want what they know. That's the thought process. You have your Kawhi Leonard, you have your LeBron James, you have your Serena Williams. And the first question I ask them is, what is in your mind when that ball's in your hand or when that ball's coming? What's going through your mind, your thought process?
Can I add something there, man? It's interesting. Our interview that I did recently, it's actually my cousin, but he's an international jazz saxophonist, Tim Sanders. And one of the things that he mentioned was, and he's been playing the saxophone for like 60 years. He's been doing this thing for a long time. One of the things that he says was, I study still to this day. Like, he pulled out a book on bebop and he's reading this and he studies Coltrane and he studies all the different jazz greats. But he said, I study all of them until it's time for me to play. And then the moment that I play, I throw all that stuff aside and I allow myself to connect with the deepest soul inside of me. And he used a quote that was powerful. He said, chance favors the prepared mind.
Yeah.
I was like, that was such a powerful quote. And it literally led to what you were talking about, like what's in the mind of these peak performers. And I would argue that what's in the mind of the peak performers is what they studied, what they practiced. But in the moment, they let all of that go and they just perform. They allow what's inside of them to come out because chance favors the prepared
Understood.
mind.
Good message for fathers, Black fathers, and good message for everybody who has listened to this live or on the replay. Mike D, like to thank you for taking time out of your positive, productive schedule to share with us. If people want more of you, how can they get?
Oh man, awesome. Thank you for asking. You can definitely follow Black Fathers Now on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Visit blackfathersnow.com and make sure anywhere you listen to podcasts, find Black Fathers Now, hit that subscribe button and leave some comments, leave some ratings, but then also share the podcast. You can also grab apparel at blackfamilyapparel.com. We have some really awesome apparel that celebrates the nuances of the Black family. Get your stuff in for Father's Day, guys. And then, just reach out to me, man, on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. I'd love to hear from you, and let me know that you heard about me on the Dr. Vibe show, and we'll make sure
Absolutely.
to make it
Thanks
happen.
again. I am Dr. Vibe, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe Show, 2018 award winner in the innovation category given out by the Canadian Ethnic Media Association. Also, host and co-producer of monthly online conversations for fathers that are sponsored by Dad Central, Canada's national fatherhood organization, and Dove Men Care. I'd like to thank Mike, his family, the lady he paid to promote him on this Dorsey Tate. Everyone who watched this live, and whether it was Get Vocal, Facebook, YouTube, Facebook Live, Periscope, or listen to it live audio stream, I appreciate it and not taken for granted. If you want to find out more information about me, simple, just go to my website, thedrvibeshow.com. That's everything Dr. Vibe right there. Special thanks to Luke, who was here from the beginning of the conversation right to the end. Much, much, much thanks. It's always appreciated, not taken for granted. As always. Oh, and for those people who are listening or watching live or on the replay, there's something new coming soon. I'll just say TikTok, TikTok, TikTok. So there's something there's that, was it Dwayne Johnson used to say, you can smell what the Rock is cooking. Well, I got something cooking that I'm planning to launch through this shutdown time. So I've got something new that Mike will probably want to be a part of. I'm just going to leave it at that. So, as always, I leave off my conversations. Live your life as a dream. If you can dream it, you can make it. Sometimes you have to get smaller to get stronger. Block assumptions, then aim bigger, aim better, aim higher, aim wider. And if you're listening during this time, don't waste the crisis. God bless. Peace be well. Keep the faith and walk good, and look forward to some more epic conversations and support Black fathers no matter who you are. God bless.